Hello everyone, Future Rail Productions here. Today we got another review, and this time we're going old school. Here is my review of the Jupiter and the 119 from MTH. Now if you don't know your history, the Jupiter and the 119 were the Golden Spike engines. They were there on May 10th, 1869 when the very first transcontinental railroad was completed. Before we get started with this review, I'm going to give you some facts about the real Jupiter and the 119. The Jupiter was built in September 1868 by the Schenectady Locomotive Works of New York. I probably butchered that. Along with three other engines numbered 61, 62, and 63, nicknamed Storm, Whirlwind, and Leviathan, respectively. The four engines were dismantled and sailed to San Francisco, California, where they were loaded onto a river barge and sent to the Central Pacific headquarters in Sacramento, then reassembled and commissioned into service on March 20th, 1869. The Jupiter was not Leland Stanford's original choice for transporting the Big Four to the Golden Spike site. Originally, Stanford's train was to be pulled by another Central Pacific locomotive named the Antelope. However, at some point, the two trains were to go through a cut where a logging camp resided on top of a hill. Apparently, either the Jupiter did not wear the proper flag to designate an extra following close behind, or the workers had failed to notice the flag. As a result, once the Jupiter passed, the workers rolled a log down the mountain, which struck the Antelope. So the engine was damaged. It limped to the station and was the consist of the Antelope, which was Stanford's train, which would be the train that took the Big Four to the Golden Spike site, was coupled up to the Jupiter. And so she took her place in history. After the Golden Spike ceremony, Jupiter continued service for the Central Pacific. In the 1870s, the railroad decided to end their practice of naming their engines, and Jupiter's name was dropped, and it became just known as Central Pacific No. 60. The locomotive also received upgrades over her course of her life, including a boiler, cow catcher, domes, and a smokestack. However, in 1891, the Southern Pacific, which acquired the Central Pacific in 1885, began renumbering its locomotives. As part of this renumbering, the former Jupiter was renamed as Central Pacific 1195. In 1893, it was converted to burn coal, and later that year was sold to the Gila, Globe, and Northern Railroad and designated GVGNN No. 1. However, in 1909, the locomotive no longer resembled her original form, and she was sold to scrappers for $1,000. The Southern Pacific had not acknowledged the Jupiter's significance until well after the engine had been scrapped. For events such as the 1939 New York World's Fair and the Chicago Railroad Fair, the Virginia and Truckees Railroad's Genoa was cosmetically altered to resemble the Jupiter. In 1974, the National Park Service had approached O'Connor Engineering Laboratories at Costa Mesa, California, to construct exact full-scale replicas of the Jupiter and the counterpart to the Jupiter, the 119. As with the case with the engines themselves, no drawings or plans of the engine survived, necessitating entirely new drawings to be produced, is based mostly on photos of the engines, as well as research done on similar engines built around the same time. That same year, the existing engines portraying the Jupiter and the 119, the latter portrayed by the Virginia and Truckees Railroad's Dayton, had been sold to the state of Nevada, though they remained displayed at the Golden Spike National Historic Site until the construction of the replicas were completed. Former Disney animator Ward Kimball was given the task of painting the replicas. The Jupiter was given a bright red paint scheme with a gold leafing, typical of locomotives built in the 1870s. The replicas were completed in 1979 and began operations on May 10th, 110 years after the original ceremony. In the early 90s, a vague description of the Jupiter was found in a recently uncovered March 1869 issue of the Sacramento Bee, in which the engine was said to be blue, crimson, and gold. After doing some researching, the engine was repainted and debuted on May 10th, 1994, coinciding with the 125th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony. Now that you know the facts about the real Jupiter, let's talk about the 119. Union Pacific number 119 was built in November of 1868 along with 116, 117, 118, and 120. Number 119 was stationed in Ogden, Utah when a call came from Thomas C. Durant, the vice president of the Union Pacific Railroad. He needed an engine. Similar to Leland Stanford and the Jupiter, previous misfortunes allowed the 119 to take her place in history. Durant was traveling for the ceremony at Promontory. A swollen river had washed away some supports to the Devil's Gate Bridge. Durant's engineer refused to take the current engine across, but did consent to nudge the lighter passenger cars across the bridge. The bridge held and the cars made it across, but with Durant and his entourage were left without an engine. Durant's plight was answered when number 119 was sent from Ogden to take the Durant Special the short distance to Promontory, where it came nose to nose with Central Pacific's Jupiter. In Andrew J. Russell's famous photograph of Meeting of the Lines, number 119 is seen on the right with its engineer, Sam Bradford, leaning off the pilot, holding a bottle of champagne up to the Jupiter engineer, George Booth. Bradford and Booth would later break a bottle of champagne over the other locomotives in celebration. Number 119 had a similar story to the Jupiter on its entrance into history. Both engines had a similar epilogue. The 119 continued as a freight locomotive, being renumbered the 343. In 1903, it was scrapped for $1,000. As was the case with the Jupiter, the Union Pacific had only begun to acknowledge the 119 historical significance well after it was scrapped. In 1948, a reenactment of the Golden Spike ceremony was staged at the Chicago Railroad Fair. For this event, the Chicago Burlington Quincy's Railroad's locomotive number 35 was cosmetically altered to resemble the 119, and the engine's pilot met with that of the Jupiter, which was also represented by a stand-in. In 1968, the Union Pacific sponsored the construction of the Omaha Zoo Railroad in Henry Dory Zoo, including a narrow-gauge replica of the 119 built by Crown Metal Products. The National Park Service's Golden Spike site at Promontory, Utah, had exhibited representations of the 119 and Jupiter on a portion of restored trackage where the original ceremony was held. In this instance, the 119 was portrayed by the Virginia and Truckee Railroad's Dayton locomotive, which is ironic because the Dayton locomotive was built by the Central Pacific Railroad shops in Sacramento, and it was displayed here until it and the Jupiter, which portrayed by that of the railroad's Inyo locomotive, were sold to the state of Nevada in 1974. When the replicas of the Jupiter and 119 were going to be built, the Park Service initially approached Walt Disney Studios, who previously built 2 steam engines from the scratch for their Disneyland Parks Railroad. Disney declined but recommended Chadwell O'Connor's firm, the O'Connor Engineering Laboratories. Over 700 detailed engineered drawings were recreated based almost entirely on photographs taken of the engines during the ceremony, as the original drawings had not been preserved. As he did with the painting of the Jupiter, Ward Kimball also did artwork and color matching for the 119. Today, the 119 resides at the Promontory Summit, Utah, at the Golden Spike National Historic Site, where she continues to do demonstration runs with the Jupiter. Now that you know the history on these engines, let's talk about these models. The Jupiter and 119 engines were built in 2015 as a set. Now, the set comes with a boxcar and 3 passenger cars for each locomotive. However, I only bought just the locomotives. Each engine comes with Protosound 3.0. Both of these engines can be run in 2 ways, either with the DCS remote or with the conventional mode like I have here. Okay, so I got both engines pointed head to head here, and since both of them are pretty much the same mold, I'll just start with the Jupiter first, and then we'll move on to the left side of the 119. Up in front here of the engine, you can see a nice molded in cow catcher, and if you look closely, you can see the drawbar attachment that was used for coupling up to trains back in the 1860s. Above that, we have the number 60 on the front of the boiler, as well as the very nicely detailed lantern on top. Here on the side, we have some very nice running gear. It's very simple in design, and the wheel arrangement of these engines are 4-4-0s, meaning 4 lead wheels on the lead truck, 4 drive wheels, and 0 trailing wheels underneath the cab. Moving back on the cab, we have a nice crisp Jupiter, as well as a detailed interior of the cab. I'm going to show you that now. I don't know how well you can see it, but as you can see, we have some nice painted valves and probably some gauges here in the cab. Moving back to the front of the boiler, we can see this boiler mounted bell here, and it does kind of swing back and forth, but not really. It's pretty stationary. And below that, we have the nice CPRR, standing for Central Pacific Railroad. Above that, we have the smokestack, and inside the smokestack is the spark arrestor, which was used to arrest sparks from getting out and burning the line. As the Jupiter burned wood, this was required. Behind the smokestack and the bell, you can see that there's the sand dome, and it has the number 60 on it. And beyond that, we can see on the steam dome, we have 2 pop-off valves as well as the whistle. Now that we reviewed the engine, let's review the tender. On the side of the tender, we have a nice crisp Jupiter, as well as some of the nice gold leaf work, and a Central Pacific Railroad up on top. On top of the tender, we have a nice wood load, and it's all die-cast metal. And on the back of the tender, we have a nice crisp 60, as well as Central Pacific Railroad, and the electrocoupler that can be fired from the DCS remote or from the transformer with using a sequence of buttons. Now that we reviewed the Jupiter, let's review the 119. On the front of the engine, we have a nice crisp 119. If you look on the cowcatcher, there's another cast-in drawbar. Moving up and back from the front of the engine, we can see the headlamp. It has a nice diamond-shaped gold leaf paint on it. Moving on back from the lantern, we have the smokestack. Now you can tell the smokestack is different than the Jupiter's. It's straight because the engine burned coal. However, as I'll show you on the later video, it's one of the features that I am very disappointed with on this engine. Moving on down to the cylinders of the engine, you can see the nice running gear again. And on the cylinder, we have Rogers, and it's the same on this other side. And that stands for Rogers Locomotive Works. And above that, on the number board, we have a nice UPRR for Union Pacific Railroad. Now, one of the features that I'm very disappointed in with the 119 is that the sand dome does not have the murals that it has. On the original engine and the replicas, there's a mural that's supposed to be here on the sand dome of what appears to be Johnny Appleseed. And on the other side, there's supposed to be a mural of the mountain man Jim Richard, apparently. But on this model, there is no mural, which there should be. So if MTH is watching this, they need to fix this. Moving on back from the engine, we have on the tender a nice Union Pacific Railroad on top, and then the 119 right here. Now, up on top, you can see it's a wood load. The engine burns coal. This is what I'm frustrated with the most. It doesn't burn wood, and yet MTH decided to use the wood molding from the same casting as well, the Jupiter and the other 440s. And on the back of the engine, we have a nice crisp 119, as well as the electrical coupler that can be fired from the DCS remote and or the transformer. Pretty cool. One more thing I forgot to mention about the 119's tender. There are supposed to be murals here and here on the tender, but they are not there. The last thing I want to do before I start the engine up is BFIMO, best feature in my opinion. Well, there are many features on this engine, and my favorite is the bell sound. I actually took a trip out to Promontory Summit 2 years ago, and I got to listen to the replicas of the engine, and the bells were nice, crisp, and beautiful. It really sounded like the original engines that were there with me. Anyways, let's start these engines up. Okay, let's fire the Jupiter up. Okay, here's the whistle. Here's the bell. And here's some of the passenger freight announcements.
We finally got the rails laid all the way to Promontory. Yep, today we get to meet the Union Pacific head-to-head. Ease her on up there. How's that? That'll do fine. blow her down now. Clear? Clear. Let's give her a good cleaning. We want everything to look its best when they drive the Golden Spike.
Sounds like a good idea. I hear they got the telegraph there.
Yeah, when they hit the spike, it's going to send a signal out on the telegraph.
Well, that was a pretty good time.
It sure was. Now it's time to put this transcontinental railroad to work.
Okay, let's start up the 119. Here's the whistle. Here's the bell. Now I just want to note that the passenger freight announcements are the same as the Jupiter's, but instead of saying we're meeting the Union Pacific head-to-head, the 119's version says we're meeting the Central Pacific head-to-head, like so.
Finally got the rails laid all the way to Promontory.
Yep, today we get to meet the Central Pacific head-to-head.
So I got both engines ready to go, so let's go ahead and roll them out. That's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed. These engines are a bunch of fun to run. They're beautifully painted, and they just look just as beautiful as they did over 100 years ago, as well as 2 years ago when I went and saw the replicas. If you're interested in picking one of these up, the retail price for each engine is $429, but if you go through a good MTH dealer, you could get a discount. However, these engines have been discontinued since late last year, and no more will be made, but they tend to pop up on eBay every so often, but you have to pay through the nose to get them. Anyways, if you're interested in looking up the replicas, I will link a video down in the description below. Anyways, that's it for now. I'm Future Rail Productions, and I'll see you next time.